Rabbi, did you want to start the
Boker
program?
Tov, good morning, everybody. We are moving into Lech Lecha this week, and it's all about journeys. And so we're going to hear about Maggie Anton's journey to becoming an author, something she never expected to be doing. And we met back in 1993 in a women's Talmud class in LA, run by Rachel Adler. She was teaching it. We were there with a whole bunch of people. And most of us thought it was very interesting. We brought in the women's perspective into Talmud, which is usually looking at the men's perspective. But Maggie took it to a whole other level, and that's what you're going to hear about today. So I'm so delighted, Maggie, that you could come here, these many years later, these many books later, and tell us something about your Lech Lecha, your Lechi Lach, your journey to becoming an author, and how you took your incredible medical training and scientific training and turned it into research for these books that teach us so much. So I turn it over to Maggie.
I never intended to be an author. I have a BS in chemistry from UCLA. I'm a native of Los Angeles, and I still live in Los Angeles. I got married in Culver City. So that's almost Los Angeles. It kind of sneaks in there. Los Angeles is all around Culver City. So it's still, a mystery to me how all these books back there on the table with my name on it came about. But I do know a little bit, I was in the journey to have those books arrived with my name on it. And it started actually quite earlier than 1992. I grew up in a secular socialist household. That doesn't mean I didn't get a Jewish education. I went to Kinderschule. Good, somebody's nodding. Put on by the Workmen's Circle people. So I learned about Jewish history. I learned about Israel. I didn't learn about God. But so we did the holidays, Passover and Hanukkah, but Yom Kippur. Actually, I lived in a very Jewish neighborhood. The schools all the LA schools close on Jewish holidays because so many of the teachers are Jewish that they can't get any substitutes. And it just makes it easier for everybody. Anyway, so I didn't go to school on Yom Kippur, but I didn't go to shul either. Me and a bunch of friends would go into Hollywood and watch whatever movie was at Grandma's Chinese. Yeah, well, that's secular. So, but I did learn about Jewish religion through books. I was a voracious reader. I'm still a voracious reader and of fiction. My husband reads the books on the right side of the bestseller list, and I only read nonfiction if I'm forced to for research purposes. But I prefer, for pleasure, to read fiction. And when I was, somewhere between the ages of 5 and 10, I discovered the All of a Kind Family series by Sidney Taylor. Takes place turn of the century. Lower East Side of New York. They're immigrants. And I will probably need a napkin because at some point I am going to sneeze. And I don't want that to happen without me being prepared. So I learned about, there we go. Fancy. Actually, while we're at it, anybody else who wants one can certainly have one. And anybody else who has actually a cough drop or something like that in their purse. You can't even have a minion of Jewish women that someone doesn't have a cough drop in their purse that they're willing to share.
One of the funniest programs you can do in a women's
see.
is to empty your pocketbook and see.
Yeah. Oh, good. I have a choice of flavors.
No, they're
But she's got a different one.
Very interesting. They're only women.
So there. I'm gonna
Why
start.
am I here?
Because you're interested.
I am.
And you're gonna learn a lot too. Anyway, so I started by reading All of a Kind Family, where I learned all about life for Jewish family, and they were Orthodox Jewish family. So when they observed Shabbat, I was in the room with them. And when they sat in the sukkah, I was in the sukkah with them. And for Yom Kippur, when they were fasting, not the children, but anyway, they would take flowers to the mother. So I learned all the religious stuff that, oh, I must admit, nobody went to, we didn't go to funerals. I got to go to, the Oliver Kahn family. I went to a Pinyon Ben. I went to a wedding. This is a children's book, so I didn't go to a Jewish funeral vicariously. So I learned a lot through that. Then I think when I was 11 or 12, I read Exodus by Leon Uris, and that's when I learned about the Holocaust, which they sure were not teaching to children in the 1950s. And even now, I think they don't. I'm trying to think of my grandsons when they read Diary of Anne Frank.
Middle school.
Yeah, so early middle school. And so I learned, boy, did I learn about the Holocaust. If Exodus is the first book you get about it, it's like, whoa. And at that point, I realized, oh my God, if my family had been someplace else, they would kill us just because we were Jews. And I was so, can't say odd, I was so shocked. Somehow, this really got internalized. And I swore to myself, I am going to name my first son Ari. Some people think it's because I watched the movie and saw Paul Newman. Well, but that was later. I had already decided that. And then it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll take. And indeed, my one and only son is named Ari, and he lives down in Scottsdale. From here, I'm going back to his house, and I'll be staying there with visit with his family for a little bit. So then when I was in college in the late 1960s, I read The Chosen and The Promise by Chaim Potok. That's when I learned there was something called Talmud. And even though they never quite say that women are forbidden or discouraged or prevented from studying Talmud, I got the message that only males study Talmud. But The Chosen and The Promise actually have no Talmud in them. It's all round about the yeshiva world and who's allowed to teach it and what's the legitimate text and all that kind of stuff. But there's not a line of Gemara in there. Flash forward to 1992, where I hear that Rachel Adler is teaching a women's Talmud class that's going to meet around her dining room table. And there, immediately, like all you have to, at that point, I knew women were forbidden to study this. The reason she started a women's class is because there was no place in Southern California, second largest Jewish community in the world, for a woman to study Talmud. So I immediately signed up thinking, oh, I know something about Talmud. I read The Chosen. Little did I know. If I'm wrong, don't correct me. But every other woman sitting around that table, except me, was either a rabbi or studying to be a rabbi. I was so out of my depth because we weren't studying it in English. Thank goodness, at least we were discussing it in English. And it takes so much time to get through even a paragraph of Talmud that once we got through that, then the rest of the time would just be discussing it. I mean, it does take you years. But the Daf Yomi business, where you study a page a day, that is baloney.
Yummy. Yeah.
No, stop them.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't. I mean, you can read it in a day, but you're not going to understand it. And you can't have any kind of decent discussion. I mean, it's because if you actually want to do that kind of thing, this is how I study Talmud now online from the conservative movement. They have two different, you get the emails every day with the commentary and all that. There's Mishnah Yomit, where you get one Mishnah a day. That is manageable. But they do the Daf Shvivi for a week. So it takes 7 days to go through one page of Talmud. But you get into the nitty gritty and you hear what the commentators have to say. And so I do that. And actually it was interesting, just recently the Mishnah was Nida and the Daf Yomi was Kiddushin. So
Wow.
two very focused on Kiddushim is marriage. And
Never seen that.
and Nida is mikvah and menstruation. So I had both of those at the time that I'm talking about women's obligations and disadvantages. And indeed, Nida and marriage, that's two of the big ones. All right, so I'm in this class, we're reading women's Talmud class, and Rachel points out that Rashi has no sons, only daughters. And the daughters were learned, they were tefillin, and my kids, they weren't quite out of the nest, but they were mostly out of the nest. You know, they kind of like came back to sleep otherwise. And my husband's commute was getting longer and longer. So I decided to see if those legends were true. Living in LA, we've got some rabbinic schools that have their Judaic libraries. We have UCLA, Claremont Colleges, USC. Conveniently, I was an alumni of UCLA, so I could use their libraries, and my nephew was a student at USC, so I could use his. My son's was at UC San Diego, so I had ways to get into all the libraries that I needed to. And I quickly found out that the legends were true. And I also found out that the women in Rashi's community, we're talking 11th century Troyes, France. Troyes is the capital of the province of Champagne, and Rashi was a vintner. Good place to be a vintner in the province of Champagne. And apparently he was the only Jewish vintner. And just like today, if something is expensive, people think it's better. The Jewish wine, and he was the only Jewish vintner in Champagne, of course they had to charge a lot of money for it because the demand was high. And also, you got this small family doing it, and that was their living. So it turns out that actually a whole lot of non-Jews wanted Rashi's vintage as well, eventually. And he had to drop out of, I'm going to say rabbinic school, drop out of the yeshiva where he was going in Germany, in the Rhineland, to take care of the vineyard when his mother got old. Anyway, so he's there, and that's out of boredom or whatever. He's teaching. That's when he taught his daughters Talmud, because he was such a teacher that he would teach a rock if he couldn't find any human or living students. So I learned so much about that community. The women in Rashi's community had aliyah to the Torah. They were counted in a minyan. Women could blow the shofar if they wanted to. They sat in the sukkah. They did all the men's mitzvot. And when I say that, they even did circumcision, but they were the mohelet. They
It'll take another 2,000 years to get back to that.
Yes. In the Orthodox world, I don't think that women chant Torah in front of men.
Right.
Still.
But they do have a Talmud class, and they do have.
Oh yeah, and women have their own minyan where they
Yeah.
do all that stuff.
I
If you
went
have
to a bat mitzvah.
But not
that was
with,
all
not
women.
mixed.
not mixed,
Competitive.
so they're making progress. So women in Rashi's community, I was so astonished that, and I'm learning this like 30 years, that something possessed me to write about it. Because I just had to capture this information. And I don't remember my thought process, because I don't think there was a thought process. I think something possessed me and I started writing. But I was writing for me. I was writing the book that I want to read. Actually, all my books are the books I want to read. I certainly back then never imagined there would be any audience. I frankly was not confident that I would even finish it. I just, I'm going to do this. We'll see what happens. But I certainly, as I said, I never imagined anybody else would read it. And I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my husband, didn't tell my kids, didn't tell anybody I was working on this, because I didn't want a few days later, when I abandoned the process, someone to say, "Oh, what happened to Rashi's daughters?" It's like, okay. So like 5 years later, maybe 6 years later, still studying Talmud with the group, not with Raquel, because at that point she's going to rabbinic school.
Right, she went back.
But we moved to have Janet
Man,
teach. Yeah, so anyway, I'm still studying Talmud with the women. And I had finished it, I thought. Actually, I only had finished the first draft, but what did I know? So then I told a few people, Jewish women that I knew, rabbis, whatever, and they all like, wow, I can't wait to read it. And I'm thinking, are you crazy? I'm not an author, this could be the world's worst, But anyway, it made me realize there's actually audience for this. And we're talking late 1990s. The Red Tent has just come out. There's no other Jewish historical fiction by and about women, except for the Red Tent. The publishers somehow hadn't done the demographics research to realize that Jewish women buy more books than any other demographic. And I learned this because I went to publishing school. So they all said, like, wow, this is great. You should get this published. And so I found an editor, which is actually not that difficult. I looked up other kinds, the non-Jewish books, the non-fiction books, lots of Jewish non-fiction books. And I looked through, they always thank, their agent, their editor, their mother, whatever. So I looked up who all these people were and I contacted them. We're into the internet age now, so I could email people. And I found an editor, Beth Lieberman, now Rabbi Beth Lieberman.
oh my gosh.
And so that's what I call it, the Rashi studies curse or the Rashi studies blessing. Every single editor I had, Beth went further limit and became a rabbi, but all the rest of them either got married, got pregnant, or both during the years they were working on I churned through editors, which was a really bad thing, but it was a good thing for the reason that they were leaving. Anyway, yeah, and Beth got pregnant with her second daughter while working on it. Anyway, she still edits my books. Anyway, so she the first thing she said was, this is way too long. It was 600 pages, single spaced. And you gotta, cut. So the first cut I did was to cut out every scene that did not have Rashi or one of the daughters or one of their husbands in it. All the secondary characters, if they had a scene, it was with the family. That got rid of a bunch. And finally, it's just, okay, Rashi has 3 daughters. I'll turn it into a trilogy and that will solve that problem. So I did. I could not find a publisher. So I started my own company, Benot Press, still in action for the choice. And I knew my right audience was. I joined every Jewish women's group that I could find, including ones that I didn't even know of before. A life member of everyone that offers a life membership. And I hit the road, all these Jewish women's groups, they have meetings, sisterhood, Hadassah, and they want speakers particularly addressed to women, Jewish, and free. So, I sell books in the back of the room, and that's, so I encourage you to walk out of here with a book, considering the price of gas to drive from LA. I had not anticipated what it would cost, although I don't understand how you guys have $3.99 gas when in Phoenix it's $4.79.
It's
There was actually a
369
report
here.
on that on the
369.
news, and they said it's because it gets piped in from California.
No, that's worse. Our
Makes it higher.
no. Oh, Phoenix
ours gets trucked in. and
Oh.
It's cheaper.
yeah, right. Anyway, yeah, it used to be like $7 in LA last month. So anyway, you don't need to discuss that.
That's an aside.
Yeah, very much on the side. So I'd have to get track where I was. So anyway, so I knew that I would find this. So like my first speaking gig was a sisterhood membership brunch or luncheon at my sister's synagogue in Sacramento. I love these actual brunch sisterhood events or the membership events because they're not coming to see me. They're just coming for the free meal that their Jews, our donor has.
Smart woman.
So anyway, I walked in there I had it all printed out what I was gonna say. I did like the first 3 lines, put it down and just went with it. And at the end, I sold 75% of the room on Rashi's Daughters.
Wow.
So I kept going and in a year, 14 months, I'd sold 26,000 copies.
Whoa.
Okay, the reason there's a barcode on the back side of your book is so that everybody can keep track of how many books have sold. And the big publishers,
Pay attention.
they paid attention. And when book 2 was starting to come out, I mean, I'd finished book 1, I sold all those. I had finished book 2 and I was getting ready to do it myself, just like before. The big publishers took note. There was a bidding war between HarperCollins, Crown, and Penguin for book 2 and book 3, but they would also pick up book 1 because I said, you know, I'm not continuing to publish one book, and you guys are going to publish the other 2. So they picked it up. They paid me a nice 6-figure advance. Sold well enough that they wanted another. You know, you got any more Jewish heroines? Which I did. Rav Hizda's daughter. So I wrote that duology. You learned a new word. You know, I knew it was going to be a series of 2 books. I went on Google and I said, what is a series of 2 books called? And there it came up, duology. Like, okay, now I know. Yeah. So the things you learn. So I was going around doing book tours, you know, for Rashi's Daughters, actually. So this was in the early 2000s, maybe, because Rashi's Daughters didn't actually get printed until like 2004. That was, in 2005 was Rashi's 900th yard site. That's why I didn't push to try and find any publisher, is I was determined this book is going to come out for Rashi's 900th yard site, for all the hoopla there's going to be over it. I want to have my book take advantage of that. Well, I was the hoopla. You know, people look at me like, what? There wasn't anything else except me. But it
You're
did.
the hoopla.
I was the hoopla, but that forced me to get the book out in 2005. So Penguin picked it up. I did the other 2, and I'm going on book tour. And like here, I stay at somebody's house. I'm speaking all for charities. I don't want them to have to pay for a hotel. And besides, a hotel is boring, it's lonely, and I meet so many people when I stay in their homes. So I was someplace on the East Coast, and I noticed in the room that I'm staying in, you know, there's bookcases everywhere. I see The Chosen and The Promise is up there, and I thought, oh gosh, I haven't read those in 30 years, or however many years it was. I thought I'd read them again, mainly because I had already read them once. If I didn't finish it, it didn't matter. I knew how it ended. So I started reading. At this point, okay, I've been studying women's Talmud for a lot of years, for 10 years, maybe at that point. And I'm a feminist. You know, if there was a card carrying feminist you could be, I would have the card. And I'm going like, wait a second, where are the women? The 2, The Chosen and The Promise. And if you didn't read it, then, well, I'm not going to say you should, but that's,
You'd enjoy it.
you know.
And you see
Both-
what's lacking.
Oh, yes, because both of the protagonists, the Orthodox one and the Hasidic one, the Orthodox one, he's like Bambi. His mother died so long ago, he doesn't remember her. His dad has never remarried. We don't know her name. There's no picture of her in the house. He never says Kaddish. They don't go to the cemetery. It's like, what is it? You know, she's not even a ghost. What is with this? Totally left out. The Hasidic one, not much better. The mother is the Rebbitzin at this point. And I think there's 3 scenes with her in it, all of which she's in the kitchen. And she may or may not even say more than a sentence. She doesn't have a name either. We don't know backstory on any of these women. The Rebbitzin, even though she's the second most important woman in the Hasidic community, because the women with their questions, they don't go to the Rebbe, they go to her. And she knows all the answers. Come on, she's been doing this for years. And if for some reason there's a question she can't answer, she can ask her husband. And I noticed it. I didn't notice that the first time I read those books, but I sure noticed it now. It's like, wait a minute. And so that irked me a great deal. And then shortly after that, I read the only book that Chaim Potok ever wrote with a female protagonist, Davita's Harp. And apparently he was going to have a sequel to that, but he got such poor reviews of how he wrote from a female point of view, which I agree, that that he never did that. Besides, he died in 2002, so he didn't have a whole lot of more time. He wrote a few more books with guys. So I'm reading Davita's Harp, which takes place before The Chosen. And she's in an Orthodox grade school. And who is her classmate but the hero of The Chosen? I was like, wait a second. Potok could have had any fictional male character have that part. And she and the guy, they're both the smartest kids in the class. They're both attracted to each other. I mean, they're like 13 or 14 years old, so not surprising. But he mentions that. And at the very end, she's clearly she asked to study Talmud and they would not let her. And she's so irritated by that she studies all the stuff that she's supposed to study so well that she becomes the best student in her class, which means she should win this particular award for best student. But the trustees or whoever say, no, we can't do that. If a girl wins this award, no boy will ever come to our school again, because they'll think the boys are so badly taught that the girl is the best. So at graduation, they give her some of the Bible award or something. She is sure that the guy from The Chosen will win this award for best student. He's second to her, but he doesn't get it. Somebody else gets it. And after graduation, he comes over to her, the one from The Chosen, and says, I know you're supposed to have gotten this award. And they offered it to me and I turned it down because you should have gotten it. You deserved it. And I didn't want to take it that way. So we know he's like a mensch. And the book ends. And I'm going, wait a second. Why would Potok have brought this character back? Why did 30 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, he's writing a book with this character. And for those of you who have never heard of Chekhov's gun, I assume you've heard of Chekhov, the great playwright. He had a rule for other playwrights. If a gun appears in Act 1, it better go off by Act 3, or your audience is going to be like throwing tomatoes at you. So I thought, okay, I did some look at her, searching around, and found that Potok had wanted to write a sequel, but didn't. And that's when I was writing the Rav Hizda series for Penguin, even though in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I want to shoot Potok's gun. I want to.
Good phrase.
I want to tell the story of those two characters who are obviously, I don't want to say destined for each other, this is fiction, who Potok obviously had wanted their story to continue. He'd at the end of The Promise, the Hasidic guy is married, but our Orthodox one, he's dated a whole lot of girls, but no bride yet for him. So I start thinking about how would I get them together? How would I work this out? And the first thing I thought was, what location would I set it in? What years would I set it in? There's no question about location. It's going to be Brooklyn. That's where they're all living. I discovered that Potok wrote several short stories about Davida. So I learned that she went to college, that she went to Columbia University, that she majored in journalism. which you wouldn't have known from Davita's Harp, which ends when she's 13. And I learned more about her family from these other ones. I also learned, he wrote one where she's an adult with children whose names, anyway, she has a husband who's a professor at JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, who's nameless. So I'm thinking, okay, because I'm going to treat Chaim Potak's characters like this is like they're real people, like their history. I'm going to use his setup. I'm not going to upset the apple cart and change things from what he wrote. I'm going to use what he wrote, but that still leaves me wide open on the women. I got to make up names for them, all kinds of backstories. That was going to be fun. So I started looking, okay, well, what in the 1950s is going on? Because I knew that this is not going to be like Rashi's Daughters, that the book is over 50, Rashi's life, or Rav Hizda's daughter that, lasts, 50 years, 60 years. This is only going to be a few years. And so the first thing I discover is that, and I knew this actually, I didn't have to discover it, in 1955 is when the polio vaccine came out, the Salk vaccine. And despite all the anti-vaxxers today, we shall say no more, nobody felt that way back then. When the polio vaccine came out, people cried with happiness that their children would not get polio. I mean, New York City would empty out in the summers. They closed the pools, they closed the beaches because they're trying to prevent polio. Not that it, maybe it helped. But anyway, I remember in kindergarten lining up to get that shot. So I thought, okay, and I'm writing this even before COVID. So I didn't realize it was going to come out and I'm going to have vaccines at the, not front and center, but at least as a big deal. So I knew also that the Dead Sea Scrolls, even though they'd been found in the 1940s, Israel had to do all kinds of fancy diplomacy to get a hold of them because none of the Arab countries wanted them to have it. So that was very exciting in the Jewish world. Also, Stalin died in 1954. And with his death, people started learning about the doctor's plot and learning about how he had killed off pretty much all the Yiddish intelligentsia in Russia. It was a huge loss and very upsetting to the Jews that were in America because nobody knew this. The press there was, so that was also in the news. And speaking of communists, this is when you have the McCarthy hearings, you have the House of Un-American Activities Committee. And my heroine of Davita's Harp, she had grown up in a communist household, not just like me, a socialist household. They were communists, but she repudiated communism when Hitler and Stalin signed their accord. But that didn't mean she wouldn't be investigated by the HUAC because she would still not be able to name lots of names, and she might even have good reason to name some of these people. So that would be like a shadow hanging over her family. I mean, I knew I'm writing a romance. So the classic plot, girl meets boy, girl gets boy, girl loses boy, girl gets boy. And also you can have lots of girl gets boy, girl loses boy, boy gets girl, boy loses girl. You can go through that cycle a few times before you end up with the happy ending. So I have to have lots of conflicts for my characters, and certainly this would be a lot of angst for my heroine. But also, those of you who have read my other books know that I don't close the doors on my characters. I don't close the bedroom door. I don't close the bathroom door. I don't close the door to childbirth. I'm writing about things that are important to Jewish women, which means I talk about nida, menstruation. I talk about getting pregnant. The first commandment, be fruitful and multiply. So, and remember, when I wrote this, I'm writing for the audience of one, the book I want to read. And I like good sex scenes as well as anyone. And it was a lot of fun writing them. My husband cooperated greatly. No, I mean, how often I mean, I have to ask him, okay, what are you feeling now? What is it, you know? Which none of us, and you know, Dave, so. Anyway, so, because I wanted to be in both of their heads. And people have praised my sex scenes that they are not through the male gaze. They are from the participants' own first person. And so I had to get, what is it like for you? What's it really like for you? Because I'm writing this down. So I knew I was going to need a sex scene in the choice as well. So I had to figure out how that, how that was going to be. But lo and behold, in 1954, the Kinsey Report on Women came out. It was on the bestseller list for 3 years. So believe me, like everybody in New York had either heard of it or read it or, both. I got it out of the library and I learned stuff. So I thought, okay, great, that's going to be in there. But if you've read The Chosen, you know that baseball is in there. And that's how he and the Hasidic guy met. And as I'm looking through what happened in New York in the 1950s, there is, of course, a tremendous rivalry between the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Yankees. And it was really a terrible rivalry for Brooklyn because New York won the World Series almost every time they played, except for once. And we're not talking after they came to Los Angeles. We lived in Los Angeles. I saw a lot of them was the Brooklyn Dodgers. Yeah, my dad came from Brooklyn and we were huge Dodger fans. Anyway, in 1955, the Brooklyn Dodgers won the World Series in 7 games.
Wow.
And in that 7th game, there was a inning that is so famous that it's on YouTube. But 1955, everything was on television back then, and YouTube they had the whole World Series. I actually watched that particular game on YouTube maybe 5 times. I already knew that in there was this incredible inning, and I watched that particular inning, I don't know, at least 20 times, and thought to myself, boy, is that game going to be in this book, one way or the other. I mean, it was, I'll describe it to you anyway, because it was like the epitome of baseball. You have these 2 incredible rivals, the underdog, and they're playing in Yankee Stadium, so you could get even more people in there than if they had played at Ebbets Field. So I have arranged that my 2 characters are there. Their fathers have arranged a pseudo blind date that the 2 of them are sitting together. And you get to the 8th inning, which is when this happens. And the Dodgers are actually winning at that point 2-0. And you're in the 8th inning, and there's already 1 out, and Yogi Berra comes up to the plate. He's their home run guy. And already, everybody's sitting on Spilkus, because if he scores even a double, then it'll be tied and, going into the 9th. Anyway, Yogi Berra comes up, he hits, a ball that looks like it might be a home run, but in any case, it's going to get so far out there that it will be at least a double. And they, so the Yankee fans are all standing up, ready to start cheering like crazy as the ball flies to the far end of the left field. And the left fielder, he runs over. Nobody ever thinks he's going to be able to get this ball. At the best, he'll get it after it lands. But no, as I said, I've watched the YouTube video a lot of times, so I see it. He practically flies through the air. He jumps up, catches the ball, and as he's coming back down, he twists and throws it to first base, and it's a double play. That's the end of the inning. The Dodgers win. All they have to do is get through the next, and the next guy strikes out the first 3 Yankees, who are so demoralized at this point. So you have this sudden, all of the Yankee fans are like standing up. They're sure this is going to be it. And then they see the guy, and you could just see the audience, they slowly sink back into their seats. And the Dodgers fans who are sitting like someplace else, because that's where they sell the visiting teams, they're up and screaming and yelling. So I turned that, I said, okay, that's gonna be a big scene because my characters are there. They're sitting next to each other. In this case, you would turn around and kiss whoever was next to you, even if they were the same gender. And so I don't quite get them that far, but definitely there's hugging and people jumping up and down and very excited. So I finally get them with their hands on each other at this Dodger game. And interestingly, I later learned in time to put it in that Sandy Koufax was actually playing for the Dodgers in Brooklyn, but he was so wild that they almost never used him. I mean, he was great when he could do it, when he got control, which obviously he later did when he came to Los Angeles. Anyway, so I have that game in there. But then, okay, so now I pretty much have a lot of scenes and got things set up how that's going to work. And I have to focus on the mothers. They don't have names. They don't have backstories. I'm a historical novelist. I'm not a historian. The historian must be correct. The historical novelist cannot be wrong. As long as what I write could have happened, might have happened, nobody can prove it didn't happen, then I can put it in there. And I can tell you that I used to get lots of emails, particularly with Rashi's daughters, about me making stuff up. Especially from the Orthodox folks who couldn't believe that, shocking, Rashi did not put aluminum foil on his counters during Passover. and other stuff less stupid than that. Can't believe it. They said, you got the halakha wrong. And it's, hey guys, I've studied this. You don't know what Rashi was doing. You didn't know that women had aliyah to the Torah in Rashi's days. You didn't know that for Passover, all they did was wash the dishes in boiling water and use the same dishes again. You think Rashi could afford 4 sets of dishes, let alone 2 sets of dishes?
2 dishwashers.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway. So one of the things and people accuse me of making up the Talmud. That part really pissed me off. Pardon my French. So I started keeping track of every daf that I studied. I wrote down, the page number and maybe 1 or 2 sentences, what was in there. So that people emailed me and complained, I could say, well, here it is, and exactly where to find it. And it's 44 pages single space. So I've sent it to like some rabbis, people who know I have it, said, can you share it? And I was like, of course, I'm not going to publish this. And that was actually how I got to write 50 Shades of Talmud, because when I decided that I wanted to write that, I already had 44 pages, on a word, so I could just search it. I thought, oh gosh, I wonder if I can find 50 sections in there about Talmud. Oh, there was way more than 50. I ended up having a lot more than 50, and I combined it into 50 chapters. And if you don't have 50 Shades of Talmud, I have it with me, and I have a deal that if you buy the choice for $15, and that's less than what it's actually on Amazon for, you can have 50 Shades of Talmud for $5. That's what people go to the ready teller. They always have 20s. So, make it easy to bundle. Anyway, so that's how I got that. That's why 50 Shades of Talmud took me like 6 months to write, as opposed to the ones that I needed years and years of research. So let me look, where did I leave off? Okay, the mothers. With each one of my books, I discovered some amazing piece of research that just blew my mind, that nobody knew this, and it was all about women's stuff. For Rashi's daughters, and it's still, I think this is the most amazing thing that I learned, was that the ritual of lighting a lamp on Shabbat and saying a blessing came out of Rashi's community. This is a new created, It is not in the Talmud. It's not in the Torah. Never mind that Rashi says that Sarah lit the lamp in her tent. He said that because that's what they did in his family, and that legitimizes it for other people. Rashi was obviously no dummy. So, and the reason we know this is that somebody wrote, okay, there's been response on questions. Rashi in a commentary in Tractate Shabbat, they're talking about lighting the lamp. And that the women are home, right? They're the ones who light it. They have to be very careful, meticulous about lighting it. And what they mean is the women have to light it before sunset. Because if the guys come home and the light's not lit, it's too late. And then everybody has to eat dinner in the dark and nobody can study or read anything. So the women are, they really need to get this lit before sunset. That's their job. There's no ritual for it. There is no blessing for it. It's important that they do it correctly, but it's not a mitzvah yet. Rashi in his commentary tells us that lighting the Shabbat lamp is a mitzvah. He doesn't say anything about a blessing. He says, based on, I think it's in Proverbs, the Torah is a lamp and the mitzvah is a light, or some such thing. And so he quotes that. Then his grandson, Yoheved's youngest son, Rabbeinu Tam, he's one of the Tosafos, he writes down, lighting the Shabbat lamp is a mitzvah, and whoever does so should say the blessing. But he doesn't tell you what the blessing is. And so someone, I don't even know who it was, someone writes, so we're talking 2 generations after Rashi now. Rabbeinu Tam is already like the big authority on halacha. Somebody writes to him and says, so,
What's the blessing?
But the thing is, actually, they don't write to him because they know that he's not the one that is doing it. Someone writes to Rabbeinu Tam's sister, Hannah. That's why we actually know the names of 2 of Rashi's daughters. Because first of all, someone writes to Hannah and they ask, what did your mother do about the Shabbat lamp in Rashi's house? Very kind of general. What did your mother do? They figure whatever happened in Rashi's house, this is the gold standard. And she writes back, in Rashi's house, my mother lit the lamp and said the blessing, and she gives us the blessing. So we have this response written down, and it's the same blessing we say today. And she just manufactured, matter of fact, this has happened in my mother's house. And when I saw that, and I had come across that years before, in a book on ritual or whatever from Larry Hoffman, like the world's reform expert on liturgy, I had assumed someone was asking, what do you do in that you do the mitzvah first and then say the blessing, which is the opposite of how normally when you're doing mitzvah, you say the blessing first and then you do whatever it is. But here she lit the lamp first. But that wasn't the question. What they really wanted to know is, what is the blessing? And this spread so incredible. I mean, let's say women all talk to each other, and guess what? I do, or someone's at someone's house for Shabbat and they see this, like, what are you doing? Anyway, 100 years later, someone writes in anger to Maimonides, did you know that the women are saying this blessing before they light the lamp on Shabbat? It is against Jewish law to make up new blessings. You're not allowed to use any blessing that isn't already in the Talmud. So someone complains to Maimonides. Maimonides says, it's a nice minhag, a nice custom. It's not a mitzvah for him. And he says, this shows how intelligent he is. If the women want to say it, we can't prevent them.
Smart.
Yes. I mean, they're in shul. What can they do? The men. They come home, the lamp's lit. How do they even know that the women said anything?
See, Michael, the important things you can learn here.
Anyway, 100 years after that, and I know because I saw these, the Israel Museum had an exhibit on Hidur Mitzvah, the fancy lamps. Up until this time, people did whatever lamp you had in your house, you lit it. And they now have beautiful, fancy lamps that you only use on Shabbat to make the mitzvah beautiful. So the question is, where did this blessing come from? You can't have forgotten Hanukkah already, even though it's like 10 months past you. The blessing for lighting the Hanukkah lamp is exactly the same blessing, but one word different. So what some woman did, and she didn't study Talmud, so she didn't know it was forbidden to do this. Probably during Hanukkah, I can easily imagine it, the Shabbat during Hanukkah, she lights the menorah, she says the blessing, she turns to the Hanukkah, to the lamp for Shabbat. Shekhinah is there, who knows? And she feels like, I have to say something. She takes the blessing she just said, changes one word.
Shel Shabbat
Yeah,
instead of Shel Hanukkah.
yeah. Instead of Ner Shel Hanukkah, it's Ner Shel Shabbat. Spreads like wildfire. Women don't know that they're not supposed to do this. And the men don't know they're doing it because they're not home. So it's 200 years later, it's too late. It's already spread. But everybody assumes that the Hanukkah blessing came from the Shabbat blessing. It's not. The Hanukkah blessing's 900 years earlier. So that's the coolest thing that I've learned it. And I actually have my characters study that part in the choice to bring it for anybody who hadn't read it as other book. So that was majorly cool. And for Rav Hizda's daughters, I learned all about sorcery and Jewish women doing it and how a lot of those spells turned into prayers that are in our prayer book. You ever wonder why when you say the Misha Beirach, it's always said with the mother's name? Because in the Talmud, they tell us all incantations and spells for healing are written with the mother's name. Because all the spells and incantations are on amulets. You have a physical piece of a spell there that people would wear or carry, or you have to read Rav Hizda's daughter. I'm not going into that right now. Anyway, so what I found out, two cool things about Jewish women in the early 1920s in New York. And she already heard me do this for the Zoom. So
It's all new. It's all new.
so you have to hear it 3 times, right, before you can remember. Anyway, the first one, which is the one that blew me away, and actually I'm going to look at this. It's only water.
Does it have a?
It does. Okay, it's a teeny tiny, an O with a U in the middle of it. A hechsher from Orthodox Union that this is kosher. How can it not be kosher? It's just water. But anyway, where did that come from? It came out of the early 1920s. Up until that time, there's not too much processed foods.
Right.
Women would go to the greengrocer to buy their vegetables. They would go to the Jewish bakery to buy their breads, or they would buy the flour and bake the cakes or whatever they're baking. Mostly everything they cooked and ate came out of their own kitchen. So they knew if it was kosher, especially green beans. How could it not be? But then you start having manufactured foods. You start having processed foods. You have foods in cans, foods in boxes. And okay, we don't know. Okay, the canned green beans, that would seem like they should be kosher, but maybe on that canning apparatus, it was pork and beans just before, and nobody cleaned it that well. And their kids are kind of starting to say, why can't I eat Carvel ice cream? Why can't I have Coca-Cola? Why can't I have sunshine cookies? All my friends, And so what happened is that a bunch of women in what it was the women's branch of the Orthodox Union, they didn't call them sisterhoods then, they took it upon themselves, some of them, the chutzpah absolutely astonishes me, to approach 5 big manufacturers to convince them to have some rabbinic supervision. And believe me, if it's, Carvel ice cream, you don't need that much supervision to know there's no meat in there. It wouldn't be very expensive for them to pay a rabbi to periodically come in and look at the canning line to make sure that there's no meat or pork on this line. Anyway, somehow they did it. Coca-Cola, and you know how hard it is to find out what is the secret formula? Well, they did, because otherwise, how would you be able to get the hechsher on it? Carvel ice cream, sunshine, cookies, and crackers. Crisco, the shortening that wasn't lard and wasn't anything to do with it. And did I say Heinz?
No.
Okay, Heinz is the 5th. Those, no pork and beans, on those lines. They convinced those 5, and they were very clever to make the hechsher the O with a U in it. There's no way you would look at that and know it had anything to do with Judaism, unless you knew. And especially that I still know people who thought it's some kind of copyright thing, because the copyright is a circle with a C in it. It's almost, you look at it sideways. And so the manufacturers were more open to have something that if you weren't Jewish, you wouldn't even know what this was. And 10 years later, by the 1930s, not only are those 5, there's at least 100 other companies, including Pepsi and the other ice cream companies, who all in competition. And somehow the word got around that this OU showed that there was some kind of, not necessarily rabbinic supervision, but there was some kind of health inspection, because you're starting to have health inspections of food in that time period. And to this day, I did a lot of research. Nobody knows who those women were. I'm a historical novelist. One of them is going to be my hero's mother, right? Of course, right. So I wrote it that way, and nobody has come out of the woodwork to say, no, it was my puppy who was. And so, okay, maybe it was. I know it was more than one woman. But so I had that be her claim to fame, and I worked out her backstory and how she met his mother, and that they had some infertility problems, because we know when he was born, and we know when his father was born, as of Potok already gave us that. His father was like 40 already. And so, wait a second, that's something strange when the hero is born. So I had to come up with that too. And then the other thing, I'm writing a book mostly towards women and talking about women's issues, and a big conflict is going to be mikveh use. It's not like today where they're like spas. The mikvahs back then, well, let me just tell you, I know how the mikvahs were back then, because in 1910, the New York City Health Department inspected them. The health departments were coming around. They were inspecting pools and the Russian spas and all kinds of. The health department needed to have something to do, and they inspected places that you think should be inspected. And anyway, they were inspecting all the public pools. I mean, remember, people are afraid of polio. They want these things cleaned and sanitized. And somebody somehow blew the whistle that there were these Jewish pools. The Jewish pools, they didn't have anything to do with synagogues. They were underneath people's houses, in basements. And imagine a giant tin can roasting, filled with water, that the only time it sort of got emptied is the water was collected in a cistern on the roof from rain. And then it came down the pipe and into the mikveh. And we don't know whether it overflowed to drain out, or if they actually had a drain at the bottom they could open, so that when it rained, at least it sort of got cleaned. Apparently there was no effort to keep it clean. And the health department reports are rather scathing, and I found them because they're on the internet. It's amazing the things you can find on the internet. For Rashi's daughters, for Rav Hizda's daughters, that's another story, but every issue of the New York Times, going back to 1880 when they started to publish, is digitalized, searchable on the internet. I just told you I watched Dodger games from 1950s on YouTube. It was an overwhelming amount of information, not too little information. But anyways, I found the health department. I became, as I was trying to figure out, like, what's the story with the mikvahs back then? Because I'd learned already that women were not using them for the most part. The chain of knowledge had been broken, because back in the old country, believe me, nobody talked about this. Nobody told nothing until like just before you're getting married. The mother would take her aside and say, well, this is what's going to happen. This is what you're going to do. But the mothers didn't come to New York. They stayed in the old country. They were old. It was the young, unmarried people who want to start all over in a new world. So the chain between the mother and the daughter is gone. And so when the young woman or the young couple is going to get married, they go to a rabbi. And believe me, the last thing the rabbi wants to talk about is menstruation and that kind of stuff. So he gives them a mikveh manual that has been published that tells them all the horrible, terrible things that will happen to them and their children if they don't use the mikveh. It's a shock to the wife that she's got to go find these places and go in them. I think it was more shocking to the groom that he can't have sex with his wife for 2 weeks out of the month. So a lot of people weren't following that for obvious reasons. But in particular, the woman might go to the rabbi would tell her, oh, here's the nearest mikveh to your house. And she would, not knowing, she would go to it. And if her hair wasn't curly before, it got curly. And if it had been curly, it got straightened. So you walk in there and you don't even want to imagine the smells, because it didn't get clean. Men used it too. And it's not that, and this is the time there's already indoor plumbing. So if the woman even used it, she would come home and immediately take a bath. And you didn't need to be Einstein to say, what do I need this mikveh for? I've got a perfectly good bathtub at home. Nobody's teaching her Talmud. Nobody's teaching her you can dunk yourself just as easily. Or if she was a little bit more religious, well, there's the Russian baths, there's the Turkish baths. I look at them, looks like the same thing to me. So fewer and fewer Orthodox women, because their mothers weren't teaching them, their mothers weren't going in it. And by the time, and as I said, in doing this research, I became friends with Stuart Miller, who's like the head of Jewish Studies Department at University of Connecticut. And he's the world's expert on history of mikvahs in North America. And so I actually have a collection of mikvah manuals. I find them amusing. And they're not hard to, nobody's asking large amounts of money for these. I search eBay or something. Okay. So I have one that was published like in 1960. So it's based on whatever it was in the 1950s. And it's the usual scathing warnings. But in the back, they have a list of all the mikvahs in North America in case the woman is traveling and she needs to use a mikvah. And you're not allowed to answer because you already know. Guess how many there were in Manhattan?
What year is this?
This would have been the 1950s, late 1950. You're right. Did you already talk before you? You know how many millions of women there are in New York City? There were 3 mikvahs. Three. One in the Upper West Side, one in the Upper East Side, and one in the Lower East Side. So
It's not enough if everyone were using it.
It's not enough if even 1/10 of the Jewish women were using it.
Did they start getting regulated by the health department?
Yeah.
Oh, they were.
Yeah. So what happened? The health department found these things, and then they said no. And they wanted to shut them all down. That's when the rabbis got involved. That was, and so the rabbis used whatever clout they had. So the health department said, okay, we're going to grandfather these in. but any new ones will have to meet our specific, our requirements for cleanliness. And I don't know when chlorine got involved. But in any case, once the rabbis got involved, then they wanted to be in charge of how the mikvahs are built. And they got even more stricter and more machmir. And it became so incredibly expensive that none of the women's groups wanted to raise money for them. They wanted to raise money for schools. For them, was it important that the younger generation, they weren't going to haters anymore, and you wanted to educate girls. So they, especially Reform and conservative women, are pouring their money into Jewish schools. So it was a long time before you started having what we would call like modern mikvahs, where they got the idea we need to really make these things attractive. And of course, now they're like spas, and you now have Reform and conservative people going to them for conversion. So they're getting a lot of action. And we were just talking about part of the rules of before you go to mikvah, you have to have your nails very cut and cleaned. And it's like, how come you don't have a mani-pedi at the mikvah? So then woman gets this done and then she goes in. You'd think that would be obvious. Anyway, so finding this conflict, this problem with the mikvahs back then, it's like, bingo, I've got conflict between the husband and the wife in both my couples. The Hasidic one, who's going to want her to go to the specific Hasidic super kosher one, and her, like, she's agreed to do all these things.
Grossed out.
And she is grossed out. And then my more modern Orthodox or whatever, she is also grossed out. Her husband, neither of these guys, or at least her husband, would never even have gone to a mikveh. He's teaching in the Orthodox university yeshiva, and he would have no clue. Remember, he doesn't even have a mother. He's the guy without the mother, so he knows nothing of any of these women's stuff, and they do not study this stuff. This kind of Talmud is not studied in yeshiva. If you continue into the yeshivas for married men, maybe, but by and large, no. There's a certain curriculum, and anything having to do with sex or mikveh or practically women in general is not part of their curriculum. It's part of my curriculum. Part of my goal, the reason the title is A Novel of Love, Faith, and Talmud, the love, obviously, romance. Faith is because the four characters have to readjust their halakha. They have to readjust, how am I going to do Judaism with my partner who disagrees with me? How are we going to do this? And especially for the couple on the cover, as he starts seeing what the Talmud has to say about women and how inferior and unequal and disadvantaged Jewish law leaves women at that time. I didn't say his consciousness was raised. That's not the right timing for the 1950s. But he realizes, like, wait a second, women have it really bad. And this is the 1950s. There's women doctors and judges and lawyers and women very, college professors. They can, they certainly have the intellectual capacity to study Talmud. So that's where his faith starts to waver. And just like Potok started out Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, and he ended up conservative. And I take those characters in the same direction. And even the Hasidic one mellows a little bit about what he's going to accept from his wife's activities. So, of course, just like Rashi's daughters, when he teaches Talmud to his daughters, the reader is in the room. So they're going to study Talmud, and the reader is going to learn along with them. But unlike Rashi's daughters, where I just threw my favorite Rashis in there, no particular order, I thought, I'm going to actually have a curriculum here. I'm going to start with, we're going to look at all the women's issues, and I'm going to start with the easiest ones, the simplest ones, the ones that are not in effect anymore. Let's face it, when I was growing up, not that I went to synagogue much, but even in 1970, when I got married and I went to synagogue, women didn't wear a talit. Women certainly didn't have an aliyah to the Torah. Women didn't wear kippot. I didn't know that women didn't go in the sukkahs, or they weren't supposed to. There was I just knew that there was stuff women did and that men did that women didn't do it. And I later found out why, studying with Rachel, there's that the Mishnah designed it that way, that women were supposed to be exempt from mitzvot done at a particular time. And nobody has yet ever figured out where that came from. Why?
It was a kindness.
Well, no, that's all apologetics
Oh,
later.
okay.
At the time, when it's in the Mishnah, there's no explanation.
Right.
So
They
I
figured that a mother's got a bunch of kids, don't make her go pray right
yeah,
now.
but baloney, come on, there's divorced women, there's old women.
Exactly.
So this is all modern, trying to figure out where did that come from? Because it's not in the Torah. Anyway, so that was still in effect back then. Nowadays, even in the Orthodox world, I see women wearing a talit. They sit in the sukkah. They do all the men's mitzvot. If they officially take on the men's mitzvot and they say the blessing, fine, they do it. And
They're not prohibited.
yeah,
They're allowed.
well, not only that, if they take it on,
Then-
then they become obligated the same as men.
Right.
And that's what most Orthodox. So that one, we don't have that discrimination anymore. The next one, which in a way is the root of all the others, is that women are forbidden to study Talmud, forbidden to study Torah, according to the Talmud. And men are forbidden to teach them. Even her father is forbidden to teach her. So of course, Rashi ignored that. I mean, he taught them. What are they going to do to him? Who's going to do anything to him? He's the only rabbi in this community. So, but where that comes from is from the Torah itself, a very stretched interpretation. The V'ahavta, you shall teach them diligently to your children. But in Hebrew, being a gendered language, you don't have a neutral word for children. It's B'neihem, to their children, just like B'nai Israel means the children of Israel, not just the sons of Israel. And somehow the rabbis in the Talmud managed to make that mean B'neihem, sons, your sons, not B'nochem, your daughters. And they come flat out and say it is not only forbidden to teach women Talmud, Torah, they say. There's no Talmud yet. They're making Talmud in their discussions. It is forbidden for anybody to teach a woman, and it's forbidden even for her to learn by herself. Because let's face it, after you have one woman who knows Talmud, then all the rest of them will soon. But anyway, and that continued all the way, definitely into the 1950s. That's the first big conflict my character, because if you know, what they're doing is violating halacha right there on the page, on the cover. So,
And you notice she's got her finger on he's not showing her, she's showing. I really like that.
yes. And I particularly, my original idea for the cover was, would it be just what's on the side? You have a finger with a pink fingernail on the Talmud. And then, the other people said, no, this is a romance. You have to have a couple on there so that you know what's, and if you're Jewish enough, already like, whoa, this is a big no-no. And I tried to make it look like it's the 1950s. That's how women wore their hair.
I bet she's, yeah.
And that watch she's wearing is particularly from
A Timex or something.
from 1955. I had to deal with the argument on how women got unforbidden to study Talmud. And that argument has happened because in 1972, I can't think of the rabbi's name at the moment, but I thank him actually in the acknowledgements. He opened Drisha in New York, the yeshiva for Orthodox women to study Talmud. And nobody excommunicated him or anything like that. And Drisha is still going strong. And they really got going majorly strong during COVID when they opened up all their classes to Zoom. So women could study everywhere. And now, of course, we have Orthodox women rabbis. Obviously, they're studying Talmud. And, the Rashi can roll over his grave or not. Women are studying Talmud in the Reform movement, in the conservative movement. Conservative high schools, Orthodox girls' high schools, they study Talmud. They say the same as the boys, but no, the girls are much more interested. The boys, they've been forced to study this. Girls, like, it's forbidden, and they're running in there.
in Israel.
In Israel, they got so many yeshiva for women now. It's only the Hasidim that are left with the, with these ancient halakha. But in Israel, there's so many yeshiva for women. My daughter-in-law studied at one of them. My son and daughter-in-law spent a year abroad study in Israel. My son studied at Chappelle's yeshiva, which I remember telling someone that, I'm going, wow, that's the Harvard of yeshivas. Chappelle's, the lessons, yes, you read the Talmud in the Aramaic, but everyone speaks in English, and you have to be a college graduate already to go there. So you have retirees, men who come back when they're 60s to study there. And then you have guys like my son, who after he finished college, and it was like 2008, there's no jobs for anybody. They went to Israel for a year just to, not to kill the time, but this would be a good thing. And anyway, so I have or at least at the time, I have the distinction of the only woman to ever, quote, teach there. I came and talked to them about, because he knew, the yeshiva people all knew who I was at that point. This is like 2009. So I came and talked about Rashi at lunch. So it wasn't like a class. It wasn't a shiur. I told them about Rashi's community and all that kind of stuff over lunch. But my son made connections, because there were people there from South Africa, from Sweden, from England, New Zealand, Australia, every place that English would be spoken, Jewish men came there. And he finally got a job because you went to Chappelle's. And it is honestly, it's like saying you went to Harvard. That did open doors. Like, I never heard of this place. Anyway, so yes, Chappelle's has a sister yeshiva for women that my daughter-in-law went to, and whose name I don't remember.
Something the nun.
Yeah. Anyway, so yes, there are lots of yeshiva for women. Orthodoxy is ordaining women now. When I started talking about Rashi's daughters, I never imagined that there would be Orthodox women rabbis. Okay, they don't call them rabbis. They still can't decide what name to call them. Is it Rabbah, Rabbi? Anyway, the first Orthodox female rabbi came to Beth Jacob on Pico in Los Angeles, one of the very first ones. They couldn't decide what to call her. So the announcement came out, welcome our new female clergy, which I just thought was very clever. And now, it's not even unusual to find female rabbis, never mind conservative and reform, but even in Orthodox. So there's Talmud obviously is wide open to women now. And besides, now that Talmud is online, you heard the expression on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. Who made that up? I really need to do the research. But online Talmud study, nobody knows what gender you are. So, but I want to get to the last one because that's still a problem today, and looks like nobody's eager to run out. And that's marriage. You may have heard the Agunah problem. This is an ancient problem. This was a problem in Rashi's time. This was a problem even before Rashi's time. that according to the Torah, a man acquires a wife. And the rabbis of the Talmud expounded that he acquires her, she does not acquire him. And he acquires her, so he unacquires her if he wants. And at the time that the Torah is coming into existence, women are bought and sold. Women are essentially property, they're slaves. And a matter of fact, the contract for acquiring a woman is the same as the contract for acquiring a slave. And in the Talmud, the contract to release the get, to release a woman from a marriage is exactly the same, word for word, contract releasing the slave. Only a slave could save up money and buy their own freedom. A wife, no. The only way she got out is if he died with witnesses or if he divorced her. And I'm not kidding when I say with witnesses.
Right.
A man,
He just
he
disappears.
disappears, she is an aguna because nobody can free her. And same thing, if she wants a divorce and he refuses to give her one. And in America, that means he can go get a civil divorce, but Jewishly, she's still married. She can't get it unless he gives her a get. She, according to Orthodoxy, is still married to him. And that means if she says, oh, the hell with all you guys, I'll marry someone else, which some of them do. Any children she has are mamzerim. That's a whole nother mishigas, because how many of us can prove that our mother's mother was Jewish?
DNA maybe.
No, not even that.
My friend's children who were American, made Aliyah to Israel, he became a professor in England. And Rabbi Sachs was in charge of whether or not the children could be accepted into a yeshiva. And they could prove part of the generations, could not prove all of it. And it was a very difficult time for them. As much as I love Rabbi Sachs, when I talk about Rabbi Sachs to my friend, she still reminds me of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I've heard that you could do it, if you have the mother's mother, if you have a ketubah for each one of the marriages, because the woman in theory would keep it. But come on, I mean, my parents don't have a ketubah. They got married in a courtroom in September of 1941, and my father was in the army. That, believe me, they, not that it would have mattered. And they both got divorced and remarried eventually, but they were too old to have kids, so who cares? There's not going to be a mamzerut problem there. And it's just because the rabbis in Israel are now in charge of this, and they're going to prove how their power. But for the most part, nobody even cared about mamzerut. In Rashi's time, nobody could prove anything. I mean, nobody knew that far back, and nobody had records that far back of a mother's. And there were so many Jewish men who married what halakhically we would say are non-Jewish women. It's really simple back in those days. You didn't have beit dins, you didn't have conversion classes. The woman, the non-Jewish woman, would naturally go to the mikveh before she got married. Boom, that she was Jewish as far as they were concerned. I mean, it just wasn't a big deal. And now, because the Rabbanut have this control, this power over marriage, it's still a huge problem. And you see the, women who want a divorce, their husbands extort money or child visitation or all kinds of stuff from them. It's really sad. Conservative movement, interestingly, they changed their ketubah in 1954. I got to use it. Yeah, Lieberman clause. I got to actually put that in the book about if he is getting a secular divorce, he must give her a get. Yeah. And I heard, I haven't looked it up because I think it happened only this year, that there are now Orthodox prenups to address this.
Rabbi Tights and Elizabeth, many years ago, actually, an Orthodox rabbi of Russian descent insisted that if he was going to perform a wedding, that they would have the proper paperwork to allow for a get and for the pre.
Yeah, and they
prenuptial
used to have
agreements.
in Rashi's times, conditional gets. So the man went off and disappeared, then the wife could bring this to the Beit Din and they say, okay, you're divorced. So we're still working on the third stool of this leg of women's disapproval, inequality, inferiority, but we got two of them taken care of. That's my phone. My husband's in a klezmer bit. But that means it's somebody who's not on my list. I mean, it's not one of my contacts. I'm sure it is some kind of political thing. We'll just let it, you can enjoy it for a little bit. So, but now things are really moving. And I think the third leg on the stool is almost done.
That was wonderful.
Yes, I have the end. Yeah, okay. So ask me any questions. I want to go sign and sell books. They're $15 each. If you want 3 for some reason, if the gift shop's going to want them and sell them, I have a discount for you guys. And if you haven't got 50 Shades of Talmud yet, you buy the choice, the chosen. And no, can't say that.
You also brought in the big issue of child abuse, sexual abuse.
Ah, yes, that's for people who have already read it.
You say that a little louder.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Well, it's a big part of the book.
It is.
An issue about child abuse, from a rabbi. So.
Well, that was, honestly, that's still going on. It seems like every week in Israel, it's in the newspaper, some other, just like the Catholic Church, when you have a patriarchal clergy that excludes women, that they have great power over the lives of their people, then you have this kind of stuff happen. And I think I watched Spotlight a dozen times to kind of get the atmosphere right. And I had been reading about these things. Naomi Reagan put it in her most recent novel. And Potok conveniently created the Hasidic character who refuses to follow his father as Rebbe. He becomes a child psychologist. What is going to be the big problem in the Hasidic community for a child, or a big problem? One of the, and it's not just with rabbis, with family members is the more usual sexual abuse. And of course, this is a shanda, so of course there's silence, and the community can't know, the other children won't be marriageable. It is still there. That's definitely still there today. And so I can't remember when I read the first case somewhere that I realized, that's what my Hasidic child psychologist is going to deal with. And I'm not going to hide that either.
Maggie, I think everyone's interested, those of us who read The Chosen, to know how you were able not to write a sequel and not to say it was based on, but somehow carry that line forward into your book and not get into copyright trouble.
Yeah. Did you have to get permission?
No.
By Potok's estate to actually take the story and continue?
Okay, what happened is I knew there was going to be trouble with the Potok estate already. And so my husband is a intellectual property attorney. And he does patents, but there's trademark and copyright guys in his firm. And so so I talked to the copyright person, and she said, yeah, there's a way you can get around that. And the guy you should talk to is Jonathan Kirsch, who's like the expert literary copyright attorney, who's Jewish and has actually written he's written Harlot by the Side of the Road. He's written some Jewish books. So anyway, so I went to him, and I'd done already a little research to know that there's theoretically ways you can do it, but you need the copyright attorney too. So he helped me in writing of what to do and what not to do to stay on the fair use side of the copyright infringement boundary. And I'm sure you probably have not heard of a book called The Wind Done Gone.
The wind done gone.
The Wind Done Gone.
Oh, Gone with the Wind. You said
Yes.
that
Gone with the
a
Wind
minute
kind
ago.
of thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Very good. Okay, what a Black woman did is rewrite Gone with the Wind from the slave's point of view. Wow, yes. And the Margaret Mitchell estate sued. Stupidly,
Yes.
because they lost the case. And of course, The Wind Done Gone sold gazillion copies once all this got into the newspapers. And so with that case, the copyright law changed that it was not a violation of infringement, that it was fair use if someone took another copyrighted work and wrote something that it was a criticism, a critique, social commentary. There's a whole lot of things in the copyright law now that if you do it this way, then it's fair use.
And you had to change the names of the characters.
No, I changed the names of the characters anyway, but that, anyway, I knew I'm writing a commentary on the position of women in Jewish law. I'm critiquing it. I mean, this is not just a story of a sequel. This is inspired. I mean, my copyright attorney says we don't ever say based on, we say inspired by Chaim Potok. We
So-
don't ever say sequel or fan fiction. It's, fair use, transformative, derivative. That's quoting the copyright law,
Right.
exactly.
Different
Yes,
perspective.
Well, it's
It's
a
a completely different.
yeah, and it's
perspective.
also a criticism. It is social commentary. It's not just
Right.
different. Anyway, their lawyers contacted me. I turned the letter over to Jonathan and, I'm out of this. You deal with
You
it.
write the letter.
You get back to them. You know what to say. As it turned out, Jonathan Kirsch used to be copyright lawyer at Random House, and so did theirs. So they actually knew each other. So there were some concessions that were really no concession on my part. They wanted the names changed. I changed the names. You can't mix together 3 different books without having 3 different guys named David. And I mean, I can't do that to my readers. So I changed all the names. And I took names from my family, so like Nathan is my oldest grandson, Benjamin's second oldest grandson, Hannah is my niece. So I used all my family names. And I mean, I got to tell you, I was doing book tour at some point on Rashi's Daughters, and a guy comes up to buy my book, and I ask his name to inscribe it. And he tells me Reuben Malter. I'm like, what? Did you know Chaim Potok? And he says, yeah, he was my camp counselor at Ramah.
And he used that name.
And I thought, how could Potok use a real person? I mean, this poor guy, the rest of his life. Anyway, so I deliberately use my family members' names. And particularly, for the Rebbe, who almost everybody who's read The Chosen and the Promise hates it, the way he tortures his son with the silence business. And so his name, I used the name of my grandfather that my grandmother hated. It was a arranged marriage that she hated him. And as soon as she got to this country, she was in the Detroit County Courthouse divorcing him. And she was secular, socialist, communist. She didn't care about halakha and whether she's, mom's root or any of that business. She had 4 more husbands after him. But she didn't have any more kids, as far as I know. Anyway, so I changed the names. That was easy. There was other stuff. They didn't like the sex abuse part, and they wanted me to take it out. And I said, no, this is integral to the part. This is integral to the plot. This is part of the commentary and social criticism I'm doing of this world. And so anyway, Jonathan handled all that. And there was, and there was other like names they didn't want me using, even though it was a made up name, it was a name from some other book that Potok had used. What? but I didn't care. I didn't care what name. If they didn't want me to use this name, I'll use some other Yiddish name. That wasn't a problem. Oh, and they didn't want me to use the baseball scene at the beginning where the two guys meet. That was easy. Fine, I have them meet in a library, or that was not integral to the plot.
Even though you watched it on YouTube so many times.
Baseball in there, but not that that's how they met. I could have them meet. And so there's a few things I changed, but a lot I did not. And finally, yeah, my attorney talked to the other attorney, and he had to give the Potok family the bad news that he wasn't going to represent them because they didn't have a case.
Oh, wow.
And if they wanted to, they would have to hire somebody else on their own money. And then I never heard from them or any other lawyer.
Can you release it so we can see who's talking?
Yes, and then I have a question too. Let's see here. So I'm so grateful that you're here with us today. And this summer, I got COVID, and when it was a perfect excuse to read all three of Rashi's daughters, and then I just finished reading the choice, and I have really learned so much from all of them, and just the way that you presented these different issues. But I have a question for you.
If you don't mind, I'm keeping the cough drops.
Some of you know, my mother is also an author, and she wrote a book that called When God Was a Woman. That is very critical, obviously, about the roots of Judaic Christian role in oppressing women. Right?
Yes.
And so it made her very angry, you know, because she's the same generation, you know, as what you write in the choice. And actually reading it, I sort of understood her better, right? In some ways, it was interesting reading it from that perspective. But she just totally rejected Judaism because of so much of what you convey in your writing. And yet, you have been able to sort of navigate so intimately understanding the oppression of women and how that's developed both from Rashi's daughters and in this more contemporary book, but you don't seem to
Yeah, but
reject it.
women have been oppressed by everybody, not particularly Jews.
Right, but you, in terms of the role of Judaism and knowing the roots of it, you know, going back in ancient times and then bringing up to the current times, that you have somehow resolved in your mind that you can still identify with the roots of Judaism and still feel proud of who you are and your Jewish. At least that's how it comes across. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, very little. I mean, I can see I wrote this book to show the progress.
To show the
And to show we still have a ways to go, but we have more progress than I ever would have imagined when I was just studying Rashi's daughters. I never thought in a million years there would be Orthodox women rabbis.
And when we were in class together, we would start to laugh. We'd say, these are the questions the guys sat around the table and asked. These are the questions we would ask. And then we asked them.
Yeah.
And we would laugh about it. We'd say, they're asking their own questions.
And once you're a woman studying Talmud and all of this is opened up to you and you see that the rabbis are a lot of are jerks. They're men. This is with the rabbis that are in the Talmud don't know they're making Talmud. They are sitting around and bullshitting. Pardon my French. It's locker room talk. They're talking. They're trying to figure out how are we going to do Judaism when there's no temple.
Right.
How can we keep the Jewish people functioning, alive? That's why I have that in the very beginning of the choice. Nathan tells us why he loves Talmud. Without Talmud, Judaism would be gone. And so I can't blame the rabbis because they don't know that they're going to be held up as the teachers. They're just talking. They're talking about the stuff in their life, in their world. And we're talking 2000, almost 2000 years ago. Come on, that's how it was. And in some ways, Jewish women had it slightly better. At least by the time you get to the rabbis, it's only one wife per husband. He doesn't get to have concubines and all that kind of business. There's there was some progress.
Protection, yeah.
And then when the first thing after I started studying Talmud and I see Rashi's daughters and his community, the women are doing like everything. And then it's a matter of, oh, women have done this in the past. And nobody knows this. If we, as soon as it starts being public that this is what happened, then today's rabbis have to say, well, how come Rashi's community could do it and we can't do it now? How come Rabbeinu Tom says it's okay? He's a halakhic authority. And as women studying Talmud, as my character says, opens the monopoly on Jewish law from men. Once women know what the Talmud says, they can challenge the men. There are plenty of lenient, we would almost say feminist views. But once they closed the Talmud and made everything codes written just with the strictest point of view, you have stupid stuff like the open table, what's it called in
Shulchan Aruch.
the Shulchan Aruch says women who are menstruating are forbidden to go in the synagogue. Where did that come from? That's no place. They just put it in there. Rashi talks about it and he says, no, because people would ask him, no, we are all tamei hamet. We are all impure by death, because touching a dead body is like cooties, except you cannot get rid of it. If you've touched a dead body and then you touch someone else, that person is now. Then he touches someone else. and it goes forever.
I guess you can't have doctors and nurses who are Jews, and then how will the world survive?
But and so since there's no one alive today who isn't at least 6 degrees from someone who's touched someone who, and they didn't used to always have mortuaries. The people buried their own or something at the bottom. So we're all tamei hamed. He says nida is irrelevant. Only thing is, between a husband and a wife, she should immerse before she has sex with him. A menstruating woman, if it's not your wife, you didn't say no problemo, but that's essentially what he says. We don't have purity or impurity anymore. We haven't had a temple for 1,000 years. We haven't had a priesthood for 1,000 years. Impurity and purity and all those kinds of laws, which is exactly what the reformers said, don't matter in our time. I've seen how things have changed. The Rabbanut, the Orthodox don't want to change anything. And if nobody knows that they had been changed, then you believe them.
Right.
The number of Reformed Jews who give money to Chabad, I want to punch them.
Maybe there's somebody on Zoom, whoever's left. I see Anita might want to ask something.
There's more here. Let me bring up
But the people who think that the Hasidim are the real authentic Judaism, they're like the newest ones. They never were Hasids before the 1800s.
But they believe it.
Yeah, but I don't care what they believe. They've convinced a whole lot of other Jews. That's why we have stupid television shows like Unorthodox and Stitzel and make it. Anyway, don't get me started. That's
What about the Haredi?
Yeah, well, that's
So you're not Orthodox yourself.
obviously.
You're really writing, it's all from an Orthodox and a.
Sure, my son and daughter-in-law, my son's family's from. I know all the rules and regulations. You gotta know the rules and regulations. You've been in the army. My husband was in the army.
Yeah.
And those were back in the days when they had numbers, whether you're gonna get drafted or not.
Oh, right.
Right, okay. And he got a crappy number. Anyway, so he went in. So that he ended up, we always joke that he ended up in Fort Polk, Louisiana. It's not actually called Fort Polk anymore. They got rid of all the Confederate names. We're talking about progress. Recently, it's Fort Johnson or something now. Anyway, he went there in Louisiana. Guys asked him, "Where's your horns?" They'd never seen a Jew before. But and we've still got his army Sidurim. Okay, when you're Jewish in the army, or at least back then, they expected you to follow your religion. they expected you to go to if you didn't go to services on Saturday, you did KP. You had to do, you want the benefit, you're Jewish and you're gonna do your Jewish thing.
We have in our library, Armed Forces, Sidur.
Yeah, and anyway, so he has the army one. And so that's what he really learned about Judaism, having to go to services every single Shabbat. And, and the people from town, the Jews came in because they wouldn't have a minyan without the guys from the base.
One of the
I don't know if that answers your
the
question.
children who went to nursery school and through Solomon Schechter, and then my son went to Columbia and she went to Barnard, and then she went to JTS. She actually was a female rabbi chaplain in the Air Force. And I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. But they were the ones who, at the time, with all the cases of rape and
Oh, yeah, they
issues
needed
with the population on the campus was coming out. So I was worried about that. But it goes to show that how times have changed.
Okay, I just wanted to make a comment. The Chosen has a particular strength for us because, as you can see, my last name is Malter and my husband's name is Rick. So his Hebrew name is Ruvain. He was always fascinated by the fact that the main
went to camp with
he says that Chaim Potok was a counselor at Camp Ramah, but he didn't particularly know him. He didn't have any direct connection with him. So there may be another Ruvain Malter running around this world that bought your book because he says he never met you either.
A whole bunch of stuff.
Oh, okay, well, yeah.
Thank you so much. It's so fascinating. I've learned so much from you. I have 6 of your books: The Rashi's Daughter, of Chisda's Daughter, and The Choice. And I'm glad this is recorded, so I can go back and listen to it again. But with Chisda's Daughter, as I read it, and I said to my friend Linda, who was there with you, I wish this had been written like 45 years ago, because I used to practice witchcraft and I stopped because of what it says in Torah. And had I read your book then, which obviously you hadn't written, I would think how powerful I would be today.
I was thinking
I have learned so much from reading your books. It's just such a joy.
That's because I learned so much when I was a child from reading All of a Kind Family, Exodus.
Sure.
I wanted to do something similar.
So,
yeah, no, it was very, very good. And I also thank you. And I have all the books as well, the beginning ones, Rashi's Daughters and Rav Hista's Daughters, and it's been quite an educational experience. So thank you very, very much.
And I can't even tell you how inspiring this lecture has been. I'm in awe and feel truly educated about Jewish women.
A lot of money.
I already got one for you.
So
Thank you.
Maggie,
Too.
So thank you so much,
I don't know.
Maggie.
I know, thank you.
fascinating.